Hello and welcome to episode 14 of series 4 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. This is the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with all that is new in our profession. My name's Craig Smith from the Big Picture People. Hope you're having a good year so far. We can't believe how fast it's going, and we're really busy here at the Big Picture People. We had a great year so far, and looking forward to the rest of the year panning out that way. Okay, so let's look what we've got coming up in the next couple of episodes. We have, on the 18th of July, have an interview with Jim Gitney from Group 50. Jim's going to be telling us all about how we can communicate strategic intent to our employees. One of the challenges that we often find is organisations have a difficulty finding that line of sight between all the great strategies that they've got and what it is that our employees need to be focusing on in their day-to-day work. And Jim's going to be giving us some really good ideas, some tips and guidance on how we can help our employees with that. And then following that, on the 1st of August, we have an interview with Paul Tawal. And Paul is from Team Adair. And Paul is going to be giving us all of the information we need to validate the importance of employee engagement. We've covered employee engagement many times on the show before. It's kind of implicit in what we do on the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. But Paul's going to be giving us some different perspectives on the whole return on investment piece, but also what we can do to make sure that our organizations are fully focused on delivering great employee engagement and making sure that it's somewhere that we want our employees to work and show up and give their best. So that's it. That's what we've got coming up in the next couple of episodes. Just a final request that if you could leave a review for us on the show, if you've not already done so, if you can go to your podcast platform of choice, just leave us a review, and it'd be great if you could leave us some verbal feedback as well, because we do value that, and it's always great to get some feedback from you to let us know how we're doing and how we're helping you with your work. So that would be great if you could do that for us. Anyway, let's move into this episode's interview. One of the things we do at the Big Picture People is to help organisations to literally share their big picture, which is all about how do we help improve business literacy within the organisation? How do we help the organisation, people across the organisation, understand what it is we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve, and what we're trying to get to? I wanted to explore that in more detail from a more kind of structured perspective. So I reached out to today's guest, who has an approach to helping organizations, particularly in turnaround situations. So by turnaround situations, we're talking about businesses that are not realizing their full potential. Maybe they're underperforming. Maybe they're even getting towards a crisis situation, about how they can turn themselves around. And that's what our guest today specializes in, is those sorts of situations. And he has an approach to helping organizations with that, which interestingly starts with what we do. And we often see what we do as sometimes not a luxury, but something that is discretionary. But it's interesting that how our guest today is kind of thinks it actually is. It's one of those kind of critical things that you need to get into place if you're to get a team to go from either good to great, or from not being so great to being at least good, and then on to good to being great. So he has six approaches that he talks about and works with organizations, which he's identified as being the most critical things, and they all start with C. So it's the 6 C's, which is context, connection, control, commitment, communication, and competence. And what we're going to be doing today in this interview is exploring the first 2 of those, which is context and connection, which is how do we help our colleagues within the organization, or people within the organization, understand what is the big picture, what is it we're trying to do, but then also how do we connect them with that to help them see how their work contributes towards this bigger thing, this bigger picture. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at context and connection, why they matter, and how ultimately as we as organizational developers, employee engagers, and internal communicators can play a role in helping our organizations to be better by better explaining context and connection to our people. I hope you enjoy it. My guest today is Kevin Herring. Kevin is a consultant, published author, and speaker. He's published numerous articles and consulted for hundreds of leaders and organizations across North and South America. Kevin is a founder of Ascent Management Consulting, who specialize in work group and business unit turnarounds, coaching, and other workforce performance solutions. So, good morning. Good morning to you. Good afternoon to me, Kevin. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. It is an early morning. It's a great morning.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, we've just been talking about what you're up to at the weekend. So just for our listeners, because we've got listeners all over the globe, whereabouts are you in the world so we can position you at the moment, Kevin?
I'm in southwestern United States, in southern Arizona, in the Wild West.
Wow, in the Wild West. Paints a picture, yeah. So fantastic. So where's your nearest city? Where's the nearest town that people would be able to...
Tucson.
Tucson.
Yeah. Tucson's the nearest city. Phoenix, if some people may be more familiar with Phoenix, which is about 100 miles north of us.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Excellent. So I gave a very brief introduction there, Kevin, to your work. Tell us a little bit more about what you do. I know you've been doing this for a long time now. You've got a lot of experience in this area. Maybe tell us a little bit about how you ended up doing what you're doing and what you're doing now.
Yeah, I've always had a passion for finding more efficient ways to do things and to create environments that were more productive for people, where people could fully engage and bring their whole selves to work. And I studied in college. I studied organizational psychology and organizational behavior as a graduate student, and eventually went on to work for a consulting company that enabled me to do some of that kind of work. But I think one of the highlights for me was eventually, after running some HR departments as an HR leader in some organizations, I really had cut my teeth on this work at a company called Magma Copper Company that was going through an organization-wide transformation. It's one of those storybook experiences where a company was basically going under. It was not going to be able to survive if it didn't make a major turnaround. It had 7 unions it was negotiating with, and the relationships were pretty strained at the time, and had to really make some major changes in terms of how they led the organization, how they worked together, and how they created an environment that enabled people to be able to truly commit to the success of the greater organization and work towards those goals. So that was kind of the beginning, I think. Again, working in a consulting firm, and then eventually going off on my own and setting up a company, the Ascent Management Consulting, and doing this work. We kind of moved into initially business unit turnarounds, and eventually began to take those concepts and scale them down to the smaller team size, and working with leaders to help them develop those capabilities to do their own turnarounds in their own organizations. Basically creating high engagement workplaces and places where people produce at very high levels, creating high performing teams.
Yeah. Yeah. And by turnarounds, you're talking around, literally taking a team or a business unit that's kind of underperforming or not performing at its optimal or at its potential, and then helping it to realize that potential. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting the number of times we've had phone calls that came at odd times when people were absolutely desperate and saying, I have to have a solution this week. Well, I can't give you a solution this week. It's taken you 10 years to get to this point.
Yeah.
But truly a lot of true turnaround situations where they really were in a bad state. But also, I think we also look at people who are performing okay. I think by most measures, people feel like their team is satisfactory, but in reality, there's so much potential that's being missed.
Yeah.
And we help them to see that potential and to realize it.
Yeah, very interesting. Excellent. Fantastic. So one of the things we're going to talk about is this idea of context and connection. And I know that's part of a broader model that you use in your work. And I think that's part of your 6 C's model, if I'm correct. So I thought, what we could maybe kick off just by kind of really helping our listener just to think about, what do we mean by context and connection? We kind of, obviously they've got a kind of a literal meaning in the dictionary, but in the context of what we're talking about in terms of performance and turning a team around, and also in terms of communication, but also how they fit into your broader kind of approach and your model for kind of taking a team that's, as we've said, is not at its full potential and helping it to realize that potential.
Sure. So we were on a quest for many years early in our practice to shorten the time for these transformations, to really get at the core elements that any organization needs to fully engage people and create high performance in the organization, to really create that turnaround. So we're always looking for ways to do it faster, more efficiently, and we kept kind of focusing on what's really the 80 or 90%. What is that makes the most difference? And we found that these 6 elements consistently create results. Now, it's not to say that there aren't organizations that have been able to do a turnaround with 5 of them or 4 of them. Sometimes it does happen if the conditions are right. But we found if we have all 6 in place, we just don't have a failure. It happens. People can make it work. And so the 6 C's for us are those 6 C's of engagement that fully engage people, that bring out that natural intrinsic motivation that people have before they're demotivated, that is.
Okay.
Right. And so that helps bring those things back if people have been demotivated. So the 6 C's are context, connection, control, commitment, communication, and competence.
Okay.
And they're all about the elements that enable us to give people that are closest to the core work, that are interfacing with the customer, the tools they need to be able to contribute at their highest levels.
Okay. I'm just going to ask you to repeat those, Kevin, because I was writing them down myself, and I'm just thinking with the listener.
Sure.
Context, connection, control. What was the second, the third, the final 3?
Yeah, commitment, communication, and competence.
Okay, excellent. Okay, excellent. Okay, so and we're going to kind of really kind of drill into connection, context, and so the way I'm seeing those, and the way I'm kind of the analogy I've got there, it's a bit like the fire triangle. If you've got you need oxygen, heat, and a source of fuel to have a fire. It's almost like you're saying, it's maybe not as absolute as that, but if we want to be able to take a team that I guess a team that's already performing reasonably well, but to take it to that next level, that those sort of conditions need to be there for that performance to sort of really thrive. Yeah,
right. Absolutely. And the interesting thing is we find that people in organizations, managers often focus on I think I call them the simple things, the things like skill and knowledge, ability to do the job, and then they have a notion called willingness, which is about motivation. And we find that, as I think it was Demings that said, 80% of all performance problems are the system. And willingness or motivation is highly influenced by the system. And so that's why we focus on those 6 things that influence the system, that help create a system that enables people to fully contribute.
Okay. So let's fall back to those first 2 then, because that's kind of what we want to lead on today. And I guess they've all got, one of yours is your 6 C's is communication, but we're looking at the kind of communication elements of this, I guess, and I guess as an element of communication in all of these
absolutely
the stages. But let's start with context then. So and is it that you rattle those off in an order? Is it that you would always start with context first, or can context come at any stage of those addressing those 6 C's?
They're not in a hard and fast order, but they do tend to flow that way. And there's some reason for that. When you look at context, it's really about the big picture. It's about really understanding why I come to work, what my business is about. And it's amazing how many people have no idea what the final product is, in fact, that they produce.
Absolutely.
Right? I like to use the analogy of we just of sports, and we just went through the Super Bowl here for American football, and I think of it, and this applies to any sport or any group activity. When you think about what do we need to know to be able to perform at our best? And sports, professional sports is a business. And it's a business that provides tremendous context. So people on a sports team, players know there's what the standings are. They know who their competition is and what their strengths and weaknesses are and how they stack up against those strengths and weaknesses. When they have a game, there's a scoreboard. It keeps score, tells them how they're doing during the game. And American football, there are lines on the field, there are first down lines, there are goal lines, and many indicators of success or failure, progress. You can kind of see how you're doing. And statistics, an amazing sea of statistics.
Yeah.
That are available in sports. And that's where that communication piece comes in too. I mean, they know instantly how they're doing. So without context, without understanding what the game plan is and what's important about that game plan in order to succeed, people go into the game of work, in a sense, with blinders on. And you think about it, what do you want people to be able to do when something goes wrong? You want them to be able to pick up the ball. If there's a fumbled ball, so to speak, what happens? Do people watch the ball bounce around the field and hope that the running back picks it up?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Or do they understand their role and what needs to be accomplished? And if they're in a place to pick it up, they know they do it, and they know what to do with the ball once they do pick it up.
Absolutely. And using your kind of your example at the beginning, I would say in a lot of using that as an organizational metaphor, a lot of people, when they pick the ball up, don't know which direction to run in because they don't know which way we're meant to be heading, which way we're playing this half or whatever. It's very, Yeah, and I definitely resonates with the work that we do, which is is to try and help organizations to understand that big picture, because I think, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this. What you tend to find is that at a kind of an exec level around the boardroom table, as it were, that people have got that clarity or think they've got that clarity, but they also then think that everybody else in the organization has the same level of clarity that they do, because they did that kind of newsletter a few weeks ago, or they've sent loads of emails out, or and it isn't, because it's not been kind of embedded within the organization. Managers often don't really understand it properly. So that, how are their teams meant to do it? Does that concur with your experience?
Absolutely. And that's where communication is so important, because in most organizations are still fairly hierarchical. They basically operate as a pyramid. And so the people at the top of the organization pyramid have the most knowledge of the business and understanding of the business, maybe not at the front line level, but as far as the big picture goes, they understand the marketplace, the competition, what's critical for the organization to succeed at in order to compete in the marketplace. They have, in fact, when we talk about the 6 C's, they have most control over those 6 C's.
Yeah.
But as we move down through the pyramid, down toward the bottom of the pyramid, that information, that control, those resources are delegated to lesser and lesser degrees. And by the time you get to those who are at the front lines doing the core work of the business, serving the customers, and maybe even interfacing with the customers, you have people with the least amount of understanding of the big picture, the least amount of control over the resources, the least decision-making authority. They're just not in a great position to do the most important part of the work.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting. I was with a client this week, a big multinational, and we were talking about this, and I was helping them with facilitating some work, because what they wanted to do was to, get better at being able to collaborate across their functions with big transformational ideas, big opportunities to improve productivity and customer service and that sort of thing. And what was coming out, and these were relatively senior people, was that there is there's a very much a kind of a silo, and again, it's nothing, no surprises here, I guess. There's a kind of silo bunker mentality, very, very much geared towards, they've all got KPIs and scorecards, but those KPIs and scorecards serve what their functional purposes, but it
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily, they don't all join together and combine together to so longer term projects always get sacrificed because it doesn't kind of fit in with our short term kind of priorities. So
Yeah.
and we see that all the time, and you're sure you do in your work as well. So
Absolutely. And that's where context comes in.
mm,
So
yeah,
we see context as understanding how what we do individually and as a team fits in with that greater, connection fits in
yeah,
with
yeah,
context,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So how what we do as individuals and as a team fit in with that larger context.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
how do we influence that? How do we impact it? And what do we need to do to help each other so that we can create success in that greater context?
Yeah, yeah, and actually, I guess that's the challenge, isn't it? Is where how do we find kind of shared objectives that we can all feel? Because I think there's nothing worse than feeling that I've worked in organizations where you've got something on your objectives, which is how on earth are we going to be able to influence that, because it's something we don't have any contact with, that part of the we don't feel as though we have any direct control over it. So you don't want that, but you also want to have KPIs or measures that are kind of business success orientated, rather than our team succeeded but the rest of the organization struggling, but we're okay because we're doing well in our team. It's got to have that kind of it's got to serve the greater good, hasn't it, and not just be a kind of
Right.
parochial sort of goal. So we're leading on to the connection thing. So and I think you've said there, it's about making sure that those things connect. Is there more to it than that as well, as Kevin, or is it as simple as that?
It is pretty simple. I mean, the trick is in how to execute.
Mm,
That's really, I think there's a lot of great information, a lot of great books out there, and information for people to learn how to create higher levels of engagement.
mm,
The challenge is for people to know how to implement those things,
mm.
and that's where I think a lot of the models break down. And that's sort of our forte, is we really focus on how to do that, how to do that work, how to make
Mm.
it happen in the organization.
Okay, we'll come on to that in a second. Just was one thing I just wanted to sort of probe with you and find out a little bit more about was the idea of I guess it might be sort of blindingly obvious, but what are some of the things that kind of tell you that connection or context and connection in particular are there, but also what are some of the kind of obvious warnings or indicators where it's not there? I mean, is it a case that just every bunch of people just pulling in different directions? Some of the things I was just talking about there that my client was talking about this week, but when it's kind of done really well, what do you see? And also, kind of, what are some of the sort of warning signs or the red flags that context and connection may be kind of something that we need to address within our team or within our organization?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. I mean, one is that if people act as though they're business people first in the organization,
Mm,
regardless of what their functional responsibility is,
mm,
but they see themselves as XYZ business people who happen to have expertise in a particular area, but who leverage that expertise for the success of the whole. If they're operating more from a holistic context,
mm.
then you know that they have a better understanding of why they're there, what needs to be done, and that helps influence their commitment.
Yeah, yeah.
If that's missing, we see things like people acting mostly in their own self-interest,
Mm,
often at the expense of the greater good.
mm,
Sometimes they're just functioning in silos. They don't communicate well, and we hear people complain about miscommunication. Somebody dropped the ball. I didn't have all the information. She didn't tell me, or no one said that. And you hear those kinds of things, and you know that they're operating in isolation of the bigger organization. They don't really have context, and they certainly don't have connection to it.
Okay. So let's move on then. You alluded to the fact there that you know it's and I agree with you. Often it's like we're very good at diagnosing these things, but then, well, what are we going to do about it? Is often where people start like looking at each other blankly and kind of looking kind of worried and what are we going to do now? So let's get into some practical sort of thoughts there then Kevin. So what are some of the ways that we can sort of start to improve context and connection?
Yeah, let me give you a couple examples that might help illustrate this.
Mm,
So early in my career, worked in a large manufacturing facility. Actually, we had multiple facilities, and we had a problem with a machine shop that created these large industrial pumps, and they had shafts that they would machine and balance, and then ship them to another facility where they would wrap rubber on these because they were used in very corrosive environments.
Okay.
And they had problems with these shafts coming back, being assembled into the pumps and being tested, and finding that they were out of balance. And so there were horrible vibration problems.
Mm.
And they couldn't figure out what changed, what had happened. And after spending quite a bit of money and time trying to research this and putting a lot of pressure on the machinists to be better at balancing these shafts, and the machinists got pretty personal about it. They got upset. They felt like their integrity was being questioned.
Mm.
And these are master craftsmen. These are high-end machinists. They don't like being questioned about their capabilities. And so I suggested we try to pull the parties together. Now, these two facilities had two separate unions, and the prevailing belief was that bringing them together was a bad idea because they might start collaborating on possible strikes and things, that kind of activity. But I said, in the interest of the organization, we need to help bring the parties together who have their hands on this product to figure out what's going on. And so we did that. And that's where it was discovered that the people in the shop where they wrapped the rubber around the shaft had no idea what they were producing. They produced a lot of other products at that facility, had no idea that the company actually made these large industrial pumps.
Right.
And that in fact was a precision balanced shaft that they were wrapping with rubber.
Yeah.
And so suddenly context became important. Now they're seeing more of the big picture and what they're trying to accomplish. And they start looking at their connection to it. How do I affect that end product? And as the light bulbs went on, we heard people in the room saying things like, "Oh, so you mean when we put that on the tines of the forklift to move it from one part of the facility to another, and we hit a pothole or we stop too fast, and that shaft rolls off the end of the tines and bounces down across the floor, that's a bad thing."
Yeah.
And if you could have seen the look on the machinist's face.
Yeah.
And he said, "That's a bad thing." So I said, "Yeah, that's a really bad thing." And so people started to understand that they needed to handle those things differently because now they had the context. They understood how they impacted the end result. And so they learned that they needed to handle that material differently. So I think that what's really important for us to look at is how can we help people see more of what they need to see, take the blinders off, let them see the bigger picture so that they can contribute at a higher level for the organization. I think we really saw that at Magma Copper Company, the big turnaround that I was privileged to participate in, where we had individuals who had just, as far as they were concerned, they worked for a company in a particular part of the world and knew nothing about their organization beyond that. And when the company opened the books and began building business literacy within the organization, teaching people about the competition, who the major competitors were and how our organization stacked up against them, and what we needed to do to stay competitive. For most people, the light bulbs went on again. They really started to understand the whole game that they were playing when they came to work each day. And that made a huge difference for them in being able to know how they personally could engage to contribute to that.
Yeah. It's really interesting, actually. It reminds me, we did some work for a company a couple of years ago, a paper company, and they make really really kind of amazing products that they make. They make paper from for all sorts of different purposes. But one of the things that strategically they were working on was that the paper market that they've been in the past was very kind of commoditized. It was kind of files and folders, sort of things that you want to get as cheap as possible. And you buy them from Amazon. It's the sort of you buy the lowest cost because it's really doesn't. There's no very very low differentiation. And they were moving into kind of more luxury. Making like really interesting different types of paper for kind of luxury brands, because obviously a lot of companies now are moving away from plastic and moving towards paper products. So a real big opportunity there. And they had this challenge around the way that their employees typically in the past had deemed whether the company was successful or not was, maximum utilization of these big paper producing machines, working flat out, every shift filled with work, rather than moving towards like lower volume but much more higher value and much more higher margin stuff. And for them, they had this big kind of perception that the business is in trouble because the machines aren't working flat out all the time, but actually what they were working on was actually generating far more revenue than the sort of hours and hours of production, and obviously was better from a kind of from a cost, a fuel cost and energy cost perspective as well for them. So it was very much around helping and that's what we work with them on. We help their employee, we help them to sort of share that context and get their and also that their people weren't stupid, they're by far from it. They're very smart people who kind of realize that, when as they're consumers as well, they can kind of see the writing on the wall for kind of, sort of cheap printer paper and that sort of thing, versus, when you see Louis Vuitton and Apple and all the kind of amazing stuff that they, how they use paper and cardboard now. So they kind of didn't, they realized that, but no one had ever sort of made that connection for them. So they're now, their definition of what good looks like and what success looks like and what that we're doing well as a business has been kind of recalibrated. And it's very, very interesting because I'd not thought about it in those terms, but now you talk about context and connection. I think that's kind of what we did for them without, we kind of realized what we were doing, but we hadn't used that sort of that terminology. And I think it links to your example there with the, with the precision engineering example as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think on the issue of connection too, what we can do for people is help them better understand what they need from each other in order to create the greater success of the greater whole. And we worked with a manufacturing group who had a lot of breakdowns. They had a lot of problems, and they tried bringing in robots to try to solve some of the problems, but really the bigger problems were human error.
Yeah,
and again, it goes back to people not communicating, not handing off the baton smoothly, not working together, not collaborating, and taking responsibility for the more important outcome that needed to be produced versus just focusing on a simple set of tasks and then throwing things over the wall to the next person to deal with. So they were having a lot of those problems, and we worked with them to sit down and meet with each other one-on-one so that each individual, each team had a conversation about what you need from me and what I need from you to be able to contribute what we need to contribute to the greater organization.
Yeah.
And that's where that connection comes in, to really understand those connections between people and between teams. And a benefit that comes out of that is that you can create a tremendous spirit of service to each other. So we're serving each other. We're trying to find ways to help each other as opposed to competing against each other within the organization, right?
Yeah. So I know before we started recording, we were talking about we were talking about what we were going to cover in the interview, and I know you'd mentioned these 5 steps. So we've had your 6 C's, and we've kind of touched upon 2 of those in detail. You mentioned 5 steps that you were going to share with us. Do you want to kind of go into that a little bit more detail, Kevin?
Yeah, I have 5 steps for helping people to gain that connection. And it's a tool that we've put together. It's a process that we use, and we've kind of simplified it and put it into this tool so that we can give people. And we'll give that to the folks here.
And we'll put it in the show notes so people can find it that way. But tell us all about it then.
But essentially it's I call it like a speed dating exercise where we really get everybody in a room, and so we start with the work team, get everybody in a room, and we rotate around where we have one-on-one meetings, and everybody talks to each other about what they do and the struggles that they have in the organization, contributing the things that they're responsible for. And then each then asks the other person, what do you need from me? How can I help you? Right? It's a how can I be of service to you? How can I help you better do what you need to do for the organization, for the team?
Yeah.
And they make commitments around those things. And then they have and once all the commitments are made and documented, then they come back later and see how they're doing on those commitments, and they can repeat this periodically as needed in the organization. But then to do that likewise with teams, how does my team influence another team? We did this not too long ago with a large supply chain organization, and we started connecting them to the programs they supported and had them communicate back and forth what they needed from each other to better support the outcome that they're all trying to produce.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's very powerful. And again, in the spirit of service, how can I help you, as opposed to demanding from each other, here's what I want from you.
Yeah.
It's a very different conversation.
Absolutely. So if we're going to put the link into the five steps. Do you want to just kind of so is that the process that people will get to go through when they do the 5 steps?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Excellent. Okay. And I've just opened up the page there, and there's a little kind of sign up form there. So if anyone wants to access that, we'll put that into the show notes.
And so if people feel like it's a little too involved for them, they need a little bit of help, I mean, they can feel free to shoot an email to us or give us a call, and we're happy to answer questions or help out so that they can do it themselves.
Yeah, cool. So obviously we want you got your 5 steps. Any kind of just off the shelf ideas, just for, because I know the listeners love a little kind of try this, do this. Here's something you can take away and try next time you're in the office, or next time you're in your kind of with your colleagues. Any kind of quick tips and guidance on kind of that building connection and building context and connecting people to it that you can share. Maybe they're parts of your 5 steps, but also just as a sort of a quick takeaway.
Absolutely. I think transparency, authenticity, visible metrics, all those kinds of things are key communications pieces for building context and connection. Yeah. And being open and basically teach business literacy. Managers need to teach business literacy within the organization. And instead of sharing information on a need-to-know basis, they need to look at that everybody needs to know everything, with the exception of things that clearly are confidential. But But by and large, I mean, most things can be shared and should be shared, because what we're trying to do is build the business literacy of every individual, so that they can operate as a business person with full context and connection to those things that they can impact in the organization. Just like a sports team, they need to have the full picture and know how to be a business person and pick up the ball and run with it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things we often try and advocate, and it kind of links in with what you've just said there, Kevin, is and I know I think it's John Cotter originally coined it, but it's the kind of bring the outside in. It's like, a lot of people in organizations are kind of insulated from, the customer or the realities of what it's really like out there. And I think often bringing in, customers to talk about their experience of working with a company, or to share their kind of, what they really love about the business and how it helps them to live their life, whatever it is that company does. It, again, helps to build people to recognize that actually what I do is part of something bigger than just my own little kind of job description, and actually I am connected to something that is doing something really good, and I think that helps people to recognize that it's the intent of the organization and what we're trying to achieve sometimes. And sometimes I think it gets lost in the detail, doesn't it? Of how productive we are, and all those sort of things are really important. But actually, it's how customers are using whatever it is we make or the services that we provide, and how that makes their lives better. That ultimately we should all be kind of like, it should be our North Star that we're all kind of pointing towards and helping to try and deliver.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Any final thoughts then, Kevin? That's really, 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 really helpful, and I really like the your 6 C's model. Particularly we've kind of done that deep dive into context and connection, and maybe we need to do another episode some point in the future when we talk about the other 4, because and if people want to access the 6 C's, is that, I know you've given me a few links that I'm going to pop into the show notes. Is that embedded in any of the I know we've got the 90-day turnaround, and is that in there? Yeah.
Yeah, if they go to the 90dayturnaround.com, that site will has the 6 C's and probably all the information about that process. Great,
yeah. So if anyone wants to look into that, and I'll also put your LinkedIn profile into the show notes, Kevin. I assume you're okay with that. Okay. If people want to make a direct connection with you and hook up with you that way, yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Excellent, fantastic. Sorry, I said any final thoughts or tips, and then I kind of proceeded to hog it. Anything you want to say, Kevin, or kind of final thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, just a reminder that it's really hard to be committed and accountable if you have no understanding of the big picture or your role in it. And so I think if we look at our roles as managers in organizations, what's one of the most important things we can do? It's to build business literacy, to build an understanding of that big picture and each individual and each team's role in it, to help tap that inherent intrinsic motivation that people normally come to work with.
Absolutely. I love that. I really like that, because I guess, if you're asking a vast majority of managers to write down a list of what they thought their core role was, that often they'll recite what's on their job description, and often their job description doesn't include that what you've just said there, which is, one of my key roles is to almost get everyone in my team to go and kind of think, like business owners, like what we would do if we own this business, which theoretically they do if they're kind of committed to it. So I think that's a really good point to sign off on, Kevin. So look, that's been a really, really great conversation. Thank you so much for spending your time. As I say, I may get you back at some point in the future just to sort of talk about a few more of these areas. And I think the communication one is probably going to, worth, I know we've kind of touched upon it today, obviously, but it'd be good to maybe do a deeper dive into one of those at some point in the future. So we may be getting you back on the show, Kevin.
Thank you. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I know you've got a very exciting weekend lined up, and so I hope that goes well. And just to sort of say on behalf of the listeners, thank you so much, Kevin. Thanks for sharing your insights. And look forward to catching up soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. If you've got any ideas for episodes you'd like us to cover in future, you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or you can use the feedback form at engagingic.com. If you're not already subscribed to the show via your podcast platform, please do so. And if you could leave a review for us, that would be absolutely fantastic. We have links to other episodes at engagingic.com. All of our previous episodes are available there. And if you're interested in our visual communication services, our big pictures, our learning maps, our explainer videos, and also our live graphic recording, please get in touch with us again at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. Thank you.